Joanne, so I'm the director of the Philanthropy Workshop, but I am not a philanthropist, and you're not here to hear from me, so where is my panel? Please come and join me. Must be Sarah. I haven't met Sarah. This is Sarah Dunn, Shalini, and Lynn. Hi. So it's a very interesting session just before the break where we heard from some NGOs that are working in India. And this session is now going to look at this incredibly complex issue of adolescent girls in India, but we're going to look at it through the lens of the philanthropist. And so I'm very pleased to be joined on the stage here by three philanthropists or philanthropy foundations. So we have Sarah Dunn, who is the Director of Strategy at the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, which is a very large philanthropic foundation that works globally, doesn't it, but also works in India. And prior to being at CIF, Sarah worked at DPF for many years all over the world in the strategy department. Then we have Shalini. Hello, Shalini. Shalini is the CEO of Savannah Wisdom, which is her own foundation, and she's also chair of the British Asian Trust's Northwest chapter. In both organisations works with adolescent girls, child protection, gender equality and anti-trafficking. And then next to me here I have Lynn, who I know well, who co-founded the Kiowa Trust with her husband, educates and empowers girls in India, very passionate about India, and works very closely with DASRA in India and is also on the UK DASRA advisory board. So our discussion is going to focus very much on the approach of the philanthropist in India. We're going to hear about different tools that philanthropists use in India to try and be effective. Obviously, this is a huge, complex issue. And how do philanthropists who are sort of one step removed from the NGO working in India, and also in this case non-resident in India, how can they use their resources but also their leverage and their expertise to really focus and be effective in such a complex space? We're going to talk, I'm not going to talk, I'm going to ask questions. We're going to hear from the panel for about 40 minutes and then there'll be a chance for you to ask questions, so please have them ready. Lynn, I'm going to start with you. I'm interested to hear what led you to focus your philanthropy on working with girls in India.
Hi everybody, it's really great to see so many familiar faces today. It's good to be here together. I'd like to say that there was a sort of a big waking up aha moment about us funding girls or discovering that we were going to fund girls. But in a way it was much more like a journey, and several pieces fell into place over a period of actually a number of years that now looking back I can see the pattern of, but at the time I definitely couldn't. So I think the first piece of the jigsaw was in 1990. I went to India, invited by the Institute for Directors to run some courses, actually leadership courses and also assertiveness courses for women. And they were attended by women who were extremely well educated, very senior in their own roles in industry, often in family businesses. But when they started talking about their home lives and the sorts of challenges that they faced around making decisions in the home, leaving the home without permission, where their children might be educated, it sounded like they had absolutely zero rights. And these were, to the point that the gentleman made earlier, these were Brahmin women who were definitely not of any of the lower castes. They were struggling with issues of just having a voice and having choice. Then in 2003, 4 and 5, I went and volunteered with a street theatre organisation for short periods of time based in Chennai. And I can remember one night, the bus in which all of the actors and everything went to the venue where we were going to do the play. We went through the streets of Chennai and out into what looked like a complete rubbish dump. And I thought, okay, well the bus is going to make a shortcut through to the city to get to a different part, and the bus stopped. And I said to the person sitting next to me, why are we stopping here? And he said, well, we're doing the play here tonight. and I looked around, there was absolutely nothing around me other than huge piles of rubbish. Anyway, as we came out of the bus, heads started popping up from behind the rubbish piles, and suddenly 800 people were there surrounding the bus, waiting for the play to start. And the play was actually around a young girl who was resisting being married at aged 14 and needing to negotiate with her parents and trying to get support from all of her friends and teacher and everybody. And so during the course of those volunteering periods, I had a chance to speak to girls and women who were living in poverty and discovered that they had exactly the same problems, but much, much more seriously than the women I'd taught all those years previously. Then in 2010, we looked at how could we focus our philanthropy and be a lot more strategic, and we were looking at topics, and we took a range of topics that we were personally interested in. And I happened to read the book Half the Sky, which, if for any of you who haven't read it, it is the most moving and amazing book on women and the struggles and how important it is to empower girls and women. And that just pulled everything together for me, and I absolutely knew that that was the right thing for us to do. Because till that date, I had not felt completely outraged about anything that we funded. But on reading that book, I was so angry and so desperate to change the situation for girls that it just felt right.
Thank you, Lynn. Shalini, how about you? What took your philanthropy to focus on girls in India?
Thank you, Jo. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Dasra for inviting me to be on this panel. And I'd also like to comment that what empowered group of women we are on this panel. Let's see, there are 3 of us here, 4 of us, Jo. We are quite a young foundation. We were founded in 2011. And thinking with my heart, what started us on this journey working with adolescent girls are the fact that I have 2 adolescent girls myself. So it was a very personal reason from the beginning. And my girls have basic human rights. They have dignity, they have self-confidence, they have self-esteem by virtue of their place of birth. Thinking with my head, we have a lot of international conventions and legislation and government interventions in India to try and achieve those development goals, to try and alleviate poverty, to try and achieve gender equality, but they don't work. And I think the reason they don't work is because India is a patriarchal society, and it is difficult to achieve those changes when society doesn't want to change. So, thinking with my head again, we looked for ways in which we can work and achieve those changes within society in India, and gender equality and working with adolescent girls is one of those ways to achieve their self-confidence, to build up their self-esteem, and as Parvati was saying, to change their behaviours, but also change the behaviours of the communities that they are in.
Thank you. Sarah, you're part of a big foundation that works in many, many countries around the world, but what took SIF into India, and why working with young people there?
Thanks, Jen. I probably should dispel something first, because I have worked rolling up my sleeves as well as working on strategy. So I have worked in a number of different countries doing stuff as well. But my current role, right enough, is strategy. Well, I think it comes down to the numbers, doesn't it, really? I think basically SIF is about having the greatest impact on the most amount of children in the world and really improving their lot in life. So it's about helping more of them survive, and it's about helping more of them thrive. And you just can't get away from the numbers in India, actually. You know, we've heard a lot today about sort of the neonate numbers, the impacts on of maternal mortality or miscarriages with adolescent girls. We've heard about education as well from poverty, and what a huge difference that makes, and how many girls are excluded from that in India, particularly at the secondary type level. Areas like malnutrition as well, that we focus on a lot, and the impact that has on girls and young mothers. And another area which which we haven't really touched on today at all, is around what we're calling child slavery or extreme exploitation, and just the numbers again are astounding. So I think that just really meant that we couldn't step away from India. And in fact, India at the moment is the country that we invest the most in. We have 11 investments there, and it totals at the minute at around $86 million. So it's huge. It's huge, but it's small, right?
Yeah.
It's a tiny drop in a big bucket, but that's why.
And I'd like to talk a bit about strategic approach now, because I think for many philanthropists, they think of an issue that they feel passionate about. In this case, many of you I know, it's adolescent girls in India, but we've been hearing some of the complexities that exist around working in that space, and where do you start and how do you have an impact there? Now, I've been very impressed, Sarah, by SIF's sort of very business-like approach to its strategy. Could you share your experience of that and how SIF is working in India in this space, and particularly thinking at it from a sort of philanthropist's perspective?
Sure, and I want to start actually by saying I haven't got all the answers. We're on a journey too. We're 14 years old, so we're still an adolescent actually, and on a journey ourselves. So I'm offering this in a sort of spirit of sharing rather than anything else. And I was going to sort of focus on 4 or 5 themes really, and they've gone before us, so that's great when you're in a room of like-minded people, because the themes resonate through the conversation during the day. I think firstly, bringing some sort of business practice, if you like, to philanthropy. Let me take a step back from that. It's about bringing your head and your heart really to what you're doing, and so we're all in it because we're deeply passionate and care about what we're doing. But how we do it and ensuring we have the most impact we can, I think a lot of good business practice has a lot to teach us about that. And so within SIF, I guess one of our big approaches to that is really focusing on evidence and data. We really want to make sure we're making a difference. And I think it's recognizing, much as perhaps we don't always want to admit it, that we're not starting with a clean piece of paper. People have gone before us. There is information out there very often about what has and hasn't worked, and we ought to really be beholden to know that before we jump in. And we need to know actually as we go, is what we're doing making a difference? We know, and people have talked about the complexity. We're talking about wicked problems here, not simple problems. So this is about as well being ready to adapt and shift as we go, and recognize that complexity and learn. The second thing I wanted to talk about was partnerships, which again, funnily enough, has come up a lot already today. But so yes, we're big. Our endowment is a multi-billion-dollar endowment. I'd love to think we could shift some of the things we care passionately about alone, but we can't. And I think, I suppose I'd like a kind of call to arms with people here today, because I think northern philanthropies and those that are offshore have got some things to offer, but we need to be far more in partnership with those that are both giving, delivering, and looking to step into this space. And we're very much in the market for that, and really recognizing we need to do more in that space. Third thing I was going to talk about a bit was risk appetite, actually, because prior to being in SIF, I worked for DPF actually in the UK aid agency. What a delight not to be sort of subject to political cycles. What a delight not being an NGO, to have to go out with my hat. What a privilege to be able to pick things that we can focus on and stay the course, and actually pick things that other people might find really rather politically difficult or sensitive to step into. So are we making the most of that space at the minute? Probably not. We could push ourselves more, but I think it's beholden on us again to try to do that. And the fourth and final thing I wanted to talk about, and it links to the partnership thing, is it has to be about scale. It has to be about a systematic change. And we can only do that together. But that means as well with the partnerships, we can bring and are interested and do have partnerships with the private sector and with the NGO sector in sort of so-called PPP type space. We should look at as well, if you're a business going into a new market, you don't buy greenfield and go in 100% yourself. You look for joint ventures. We should be doing more of that. And we should be a bit humble as well, listening to our partners on the ground who know the context much better than us, and adapt to what they're telling us. So a few messages, but I think they resonate a bit with what's gone before.
Thank you, Sarah. Carrying on from the discussion and partnership, which I think is a very important one, Lynn, you do much work in India, building partnerships and strengthening the capacity of organisations to work together. Could you tell the room a little bit more about the work that you do in India?
Yeah. Yes, the work that we do in India is sort of three strands, really. The first is, and I have to say that this work is very much in close partnership with DASRA. We're married to DASRA. The first work is about research and identifying really great NGOs, like the three people who were here on the panel earlier, who are doing impactful work and help to build their capacity. So there was a lot on the first panel about the reasons why capacity building is important. And I know a lot of donors like to give money to programs because actually there's very clear evidence that their money has made a difference. There's a lot that I can say, I can pat myself on the back with and say, yes, I did that. And it's much more difficult to do that with capacity building because the outcomes are more difficult to measure. You know that hopefully the impact of the program and the scale of the program will grow, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can pat yourself on the back and say, okay, well, because I helped fund somebody go on that leadership program, that actually happened. So one platform of the work is very much around identifying great NGOs and investing in them, but investing in their capacity and institutional building. The second platform is around sector building. 3 years ago, we went on a road trip as part of our research about how would we work with girls and what would we do that would be most impactful. And we met a lot of NGOs and we saw some amazing work on the ground. But what we really understood was how much of that work was individual, in silos, not much joined up thinking, not solutions that were going to cover enough scale to really change the lives of lots and lots of girls. The individual work was fabulous, but through creating some joined up solutions, much better work could happen. So sector building, we're really keen to fund because we believe that by bringing people together in a room to talk and get to know each other, and as I think David said earlier, understand that you're trying to achieve the same thing. How can we do this together better? How can we share best practice? How can we solve problems together? How can we have research that helps inform where we need to put some emphasis as a collaboration? That's all incredibly important work, because if that doesn't happen, then continual work in silos will occur and not enough girls' lives will change.
I'm delighted that as a philanthropist you're focusing resources into capacity building and strengthening the sector. But you said at the beginning that it's difficult for people to do that sometimes because they can't touch and see the results. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you measure it or how you feel that you're making a difference?
Yeah, yes. And this isn't a short-term view, because if you invite me back in 10 years, I might be able to tell you the absolute things that we've really achieved. It's a long-term game. and partly based on belief that if you do the right things and you put emphasis in the right areas, such as helping people collaborate better, and helping people bring joined up solutions, creating good studies of impact so that more funders will want to come in, then if we do those things really well, then there's a belief that that will lead to the outcome that we want, girls' lives changed. But in the short term, I think it's seeing the hunger of organizations to have some work, some help to capacity build, to get to know an NGO and understand the challenges that they're facing in terms of introducing systems to manage, how many was it, 400,000 beneficiaries on a paper system. And what does it take to change that? So it's small individual wins like that. It's talking to NGO leaders who've been on a development program and hearing in what way are they going to go back and manage their people together better. It's just small things like that at this stage. But please invite me back in 10 years so that I can tell you really the bigger results that we've achieved.
Thank you. Shalini, could you tell us a little bit about your strategic approach and how you achieve impact in India? And at some point in that, talk about government and advocacy, because I know that's something that you do very well.
Thank you. It builds on what Lynn was saying about sectoral change, and I think we try and make sure that we're building capacity in our program for advocacy work as well, because no single NGO can achieve that change, as Lynn said, and you have to work with multi-organizations across the whole chain. You have to look at the root causes and the facilitating mechanisms of the issues that you're trying to address and those people that you're trying to help. And an example I can give of this is where we were trying to get more young girls, children, to report cases of rape in Mumbai. And we realized that one of the reasons they weren't doing that was because they were faced with usually male barristers in a male-dominated police environment where they were retelling their ordeal to a male audience. And it took a simple piece of advocacy work and a change in local state legislation that insists that a female counsellor is present when that evidence is collected, and that the female counsellor makes sure that the file reflects what the girl has actually said rather than the male interpretation of what the girl said. Very simple, and unsurprisingly, reporting went up. So, and that is just thinking about the root causes of what the problem is that you're trying to address and thinking further up the chain. But, to work with so many different NGOs is a tall order for a single philanthropist like myself. I don't have the resources of SIF. So we work with a network as well. We work with organizations like DASRA and the British Asia Trust. And I can give another example where we're looking at an anti-trafficking campaign with the British Asia Trust. And they have the expertise and the boots on the ground and the grassroots experience. And I think it was Matthew that mentioned tripartite, or Ashok that mentioned a tripartite agreement. And we have a perfect example where we've worked in partnership with the Indian government and with NGOs and with philanthropists and with the British Asia Trust to put together a proposal for Childline in India, which is going to be a cornerstone of the anti-trafficking campaign. And again, the timing of that was perfect because we were able to advocate for that as the Beti Bachao campaign was launched. The Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao initiative was launched in India. So picking up on what some of the NGOs said earlier, you've just got to be ready to pounce when the opportunity presents itself with your advocacy campaign and with your initiative and with what it is that you want to do. And so that was an example of where we've managed to have some impact. Yep.
Thank you. Sarah, as SIF, have you had experience working with the government? Do you do advocacy work with the government? And if so, do you have anything that you could share with maybe people in the room who come or involved in corporate foundations or larger foundations? Is there anything you could share on that?
Sure. So I suppose a couple of examples really, and a couple of thoughts building on what Ashok said earlier actually about the sort of devolution and the implementation at the state level. And so I think sort of 2 or 3 things. Firstly, just taking a step back. It is a bit about focus in India. I think somebody mentioned earlier today it's more like a continent than a country, and so focusing, and we've decided to just focus on 1 or 2 states, not exclusively, but to focus more there. But then I think engaging at that state level, one example is that we've had a checklist for neonatal care, and we rolled that out with our partner Japaigo in Rajasthan, and tried to take that to a certain scale. And then we and the partner really making information available on that. What was powerful about that was it was picked up by another state, Andhra Pradesh, who said, oh, quite like what I'm seeing over there, could we try that over here? So actually, instead of sort of going back to the centre and trying to push down, I think it's very powerful if then something is moving from state to state in that way. How to do that? I mean, some of that's information, but some of that is taking something to a certain scale so it's visible to others, really. I think another area that we're looking at, and I haven't sort of got the answer on this really at all, but it's sort of around the importance of having kind of mass advocacy approaches with some of the issues we're dealing with. I think increasingly recognising attitudinal change, social norm change, behaviour change has to be part of the package, and actually having to do that then at a local level and at scale again with elders, with communities, and finding partners we can do that effectively with. And I think with some of that it's sort of a top-down push and a bottom-up push, having to do both at the same time. And yes, you do have to engage with the federal centre too, and we do that too. But I think, I have to say, I think increasingly we're looking at, with the implementation happening at the state level, putting more resources in at state level, and also looking at how that peer-to-peer learning and shift across states might work more effectively.
Thank you. You're all very motivating and passionate about what you do. And I sit here thinking, I know it's not, but it sounds relatively straightforward, and I know that it's not. So I would love to hear from you, what challenges have you faced as philanthropists working in India, particularly being non-resident and based over here? And what solutions have you found to sort of keep on your journey? How have you motivated yourselves when you've come up against a block? Who'd like to go first? Lynn, you're smiling at me.
Thank you. The smile was sort of like, oh, interesting question. Well, of course, the biggest limitation that we have and the biggest challenge is we're not Indian, we don't live there, we don't speak the language, and we don't really understand the culture. And that's one of the reasons why it was... It's one of the reasons why we ended up partnering with DASRA, because we understood that our limitations were going to really impede our ability to be effective. And so that creates another challenge, because then you're partnering with somebody who is in another country, is working in a different culture, and making sure that you stay aligned around what you're both trying to do, how you're trying to do it, staying aligned but also open to other people's ideas. All of that is a challenge, and I think that's one of the biggest issues around collaboration. So we're a member of the DASRA Girl Alliance, which is 4 partners, as was said earlier. USAID, a giant. Piramal Foundation, who's a family with a corporate background. That's a very sort of corporate approach. DASRA, who's an enabler, and us, who's a family UK foundation. So this mixed bag of people trying to find real common themes, things that we all really care about, common goals, common approaches, and come to an agreement about how we'll work together. It's a challenge. It takes a lot of conversation. It takes a lot of preparedness to actually say what you're thinking, and when you don't agree, it feels a bit scary to disagree with a giant like USAID. So that, I think, is tough. We're actually moving now to look at the next 10 years. Who else do we need to partner with to really build a much bigger platform to change more girls' lives? And that feels really scary, because those new partners who come in will be coming from even bigger and more diverse experiences and backgrounds, which is incredibly exciting. But how do you have a common language? That's the biggest challenge that we've really faced, I think.
So Shalini, same question to you. Same question to Shalini, the challenges and solutions to them.
I am Indian. I do understand the culture. I still find it very frustrating working in this space in India, because it is a deeply patriarchal society, which requires structural change to address these inequalities. And that's challenging, because what keeps me going is remembering that in this country we weren't so far, we as women weren't as privileged as we are now only 100 years ago. Any of you who are going to watch the movie The Suffragette in the next week or so. So that's what keeps you going then, because you realise that you've got a perseverance and pushing and breaking down those inequalities slowly will get us there, but it won't happen overnight. And we have to remember that we're after gender equality, so we have to work with the boys and the men as well. This isn't just about girls. It's about educating boys, and it's about educating men, because they are the politicians and the entrepreneurs and the business people and the lawyers of tomorrow. They are the husbands and the fathers and the brothers of tomorrow, who are going to be supporting all these girls that we are educating and empowering. So working with boys is just as important.
Well, I've had a bit longer to think about it than anybody else. I'm not sure I'm going to come up with anything better at all. So I think partly what Lynn was talking about, it's because we have a small office in Delhi. We have a range of colleagues that have worked in India or are Indian. But nonetheless, we still are not plugged in enough. So it's about the extent to which you trust your partners and what you can let go on. And that's sometimes tricky, and we don't always get that right. There's something about our business model, even if our office is in Delhi. Well, if much of the work we're doing in Rajasthan, that's still sometimes another world away. And so we're thinking now, do we need to actually establish ourselves in Rajasthan as well if we're going to be engaged more heavily there? So it's sort of, we're thinking about our business model a bit. And it's tenacity. I mean, I sort of wanted to end this a bit on a positive note, because actually, I suppose the first time I went to India was about 25 years ago. Shifts have been huge. The energy is enormous. I mean, compared to tired old Europe, the energy is enormous in India. So it's sort of, it feels a bit as well that it's a time of possibility. So, yeah.
A question about partnership again, but the relationship of a philanthropist with the NGO sector. So I've worked over the last 20 years very closely with NGOs and also very closely with philanthropists, and this relationship can sometimes be tricky. Sometimes the NGO feels the philanthropist can come in and be quite directive because of the power relationship they have with the money, and disruptive. The philanthropist often thinks that disruption is good, and I have seen philanthropists use their disruptive ability to very great effect. But how do you manage this sort of sensitivity of the role of philanthropist with the NGOs that you're working with in India? How do you get that balance right, and what advice could you give to the room about that relationship? Because when the relationship between the funder and the organisation is powerful, it can fly and it can be incredibly effective, but it isn't always that effective. So what lessons could you share on that? Who would like to speak?
I'll go first. For me, personally, it's about getting to know the NGOs that you're working with, and I do that by personal visits and going and spending time there myself. I don't impose reporting requirements that are unnecessary, so I'm not asking for monthly reports or transparency or accountability or numbers or data, because this is, as Lynn was saying, it's that we're taking a long-term view, so nothing's going to change in 6 months, a year, maybe even 5 years. So there's no point sending data and statistics and wasting management time on pretty pictures and graphs. And the way to engage is just to have that personal relationship and build trust and build a shared vision.
So we don't always get this right, by the way. Have we been accused of micromanagement at times? Yes. It's something that we're very much as well on a journey on. But I think the key is being clear about where you can add value as an organisation with your partner. And is that about helping when you come up against a really hard and knotty issue and something's not working, acting as a thought partner and helping to try and think through how you might change what you're doing a bit to try and get to where you're heading? I think it is. Is it about second guessing some detail on an operational issue? I don't think it is. Like I say, we don't always get that right, and certainly haven't done, as we've evolved as an organisation. And I think it's difficult if you're giving money away, you're wanting people to feel very accountable for it and very beholden to you for it. You want to know you're having the biggest impact that you can in the world. That ability to step back a bit is a tough one, but I think probably something we all have to do.
Most of our relationship in terms of the sort of real guts of working is with DASRA rather than the NGOs that we fund. And so it might be better to actually get David up to answer that question. But I actually think that when you choose a partner, you're not just choosing based on what you're trying to achieve together. It is like a real relationship. You're choosing based on common values. And if you do have common values, then it becomes much easier to challenge, because you know that you share something at the core that's very common and deep and important. But I also think that in a partnership, you're choosing a partner because you deeply respect what they bring to the party. And continually remembering that and recognizing it, I think helps you both challenge but also encourage and push and inspire and all of those things. It's like a real marriage. It's a lot of things. It can be uncomfortable at times because you're confronting a difficult issue or you're wanting to say something that you know isn't going to be particularly popular. But on the other hand, there are other times when you're really celebrating success together, or they're encouraging you to take a bigger, bolder step. Or there's as many challenges as there are good moments and deeply satisfying moments.
Yeah, I was just prompted by something that you said, in that I think part of the success in working with NGOs in India is for philanthropists to take their own ego out of the picture, which is actually a lot harder to do when it's your money that you're giving away. But if you can take your own ego out of the picture and realize what those shared values are, that it creates that sort of very successful partnership. And it's about knowing your own limitations as well and where the expertise lies.
So before we open to questions, we've just talked a lot about celebrating success. You've both mentioned it, and we are here to inspire people to give. So if you could just both think about, what are you most proud of as philanthropists, a success that you've had? What would it be in the context of working with adolescents and girls? This is what keeps you going, it's the successes. So what an example?
I think it's that thing that David mentioned at the very beginning, an initial $50,000 investment has to date led to $25 million going to change the lives of girls. How many girls is that?
Yeah.
How much change? From small beginnings, we've been able to achieve an awful lot more than we ever thought was possible, and now my ambitions are even greater, so pushing for even greater things. But just seeing that growth, and of course that's a very tangible example of the growth, just that money equation, but actually I'm translating it into how many girls' lives have changed.
Thank you, Lynn.
One success that comes to mind is, I think, being able to engage with the wider diaspora community here in the UK and bring them along on a philanthropic journey as well, and getting them involved in philanthropy in India. So by running the Northwest chapter, I've been able to take charity and philanthropy work outside London, past the M25, as well as bring people on to go further south as well.
Sarah, do you have one?
Well, I think the checklist one I mentioned is a good one for India. We've got others from other geographies as well, where actually sticking with something in other geographies, like, for example, Zimbabwe, and bringing down the transmission of AIDS from mothers to children. We've been part of a very big story of changing the lives of millions of people there. The checklist has done that for neonates, I think, in Rajasthan, and we're hoping now in Andhra Pradesh. And I think there's a very exciting thing we're doing with Gali Gali Simpson, the sort of Sesame Street of India, reaching out a sort of education approach and trying to reach, it'll be hundreds of millions of children. So jury's still out on that, but I think having that innovative ability is fun.
Yep. Thank you. So, questions? Yes. So.
I have two questions. The first one is, you talked about visibility of making innovations more visible in order that they are accepted for scaling up. And it reminded me of an experience I had about 12 years back. I went to the director of health services of my state and I said, look at my great innovation. And he had this huge 8-foot by 6-foot map behind his desk. And he said, where are you located? And I said, in Pachor village. And he said, show it to me on my map. And there it was, a dot on his map, on a huge 8-foot by 6-foot map. And he said, how can you make this little dot relevant to the entire map? So my question to you is it possible, is there scope for increasing the number of dots, of having multi-site innovations which are multi-centric, multi-site, and through a coalition of NGOs, so that it becomes more visible for the government. It becomes more visible to policymakers. My second question is, you talked about peer-to-peer learning, and the issue is, instead of thinking in terms of bringing peers together just to share experiences, we're talking about innovations of skill development, where there is an unequal relationship, where one peer is actually providing capacity building for skills. Do you think that kind of relationship in a peer-to-peer learning is feasible for skill development, where one peer develops skills in another peer?
Sarah?
Shall I start?
Yes.
Joining the dots, I felt that was a bit of a rhetorical question actually there, Ashok, in a way, because I think, yes, it's important to do that. Yes, I think that can be done. You can try and do that with different models, right? So one is for us to go in at a reasonable scale with a well-known big NGO and do that at a certain scale within a state, so that we're creating a number of the dots ourselves. Another model, and I see Nick Grono here, that we've been sort of putting money into the Freedom Fund recently on slavery, where there's a hotspot model where you're pulling together a range of different NGOs together in a geography who are contributing different things on a similar issue, and looking to see how you can build their capacity together and make them work better and tighter together as a community on a common issue. I think we can create as well, I think fora like this as well are very helpful, you know. In the philanthropy world, there's been less connections perhaps than in between the NGOs, and I think though that more of that, I think it's just going to keep growing actually. Shall I say a little bit on the peer-to-peer learning and then pass it along? On the peer-to-peer learning, yes, absolutely. I mean, so I suppose I'm reflecting back on this from my experience working in the UK aid agency, but you have basically cadres of experts and networks that do link up and work across the world together. That perhaps hasn't still happened in the philanthropy space, partly because we're smaller. So actually, you know, from having my own staff of 60 in South Africa, you know, actually a lot of that I've got to kind of do myself now. And so I haven't necessarily got an expert on this that I can just send off. But I think actually, as we all mature and as we all grow a bit, that actually there will be space for that. And I think, you know, the DASRA model as well is starting to do that in an Indian context. So it exists already in the space. It's perhaps just that philanthropy isn't totally linked into that at the minute. So, well, let me stop there because I know there's other ones too.
On the question about the dots, it surprises me that in this country there are 120 or something cancer charities all trying to do the same thing. So yes, there is scope for innovation, but there is also scope for consolidation and all pulling together and decreasing management costs and having, you know, working towards the same goal. So I would be wary about having too many dots that are all going off in their own different directions. On peer-to-peer learning, I don't think it happens enough in the NGO sector or in the philanthropy sector. It's very easy to transfer skills just by speaking to people or by saying, you should speak to my advocacy manager in that other organization because they've had a really good experience, or they can share their contacts. But it doesn't happen, and I'm not sure why it doesn't happen. I think people work in silos, or they have sort of, they work in with their business hats on, as it were, and it's all, this is my territory. And I'd like to find ways to encourage more sharing and more learning.
I have a theory about why it doesn't happen, and I think it's because people like us, funders, don't pay for it. Peer learning I'm talking specifically about. I think convenings where people can really get to know each other and share problems, that naturally creates an environment where peer learning happens. But of course NGOs are strapped for cash, and they can't afford to spend all of that time with other NGOs because the drive around funding is for programs. So people typically fund programs, which means that NGO leaders can't take their eye off the ball of programs to actually go learn bigger skills elsewhere. So I think the solution is in our hands.
I'd like to just quickly throw something in there, which is technology. And India, you know, is so much, what I perceive it to be, much more advanced in many ways in its technology space than we are here. And there must be an opportunity going forward to use technology to enhance peer-to-peer learning. And I start to see that happening in small areas, and hopefully that over the next sort of 10 years that technology space can become cleverer and help people link together and learn, and also help the visibility space too. Maybe we need a very big technology philanthropist to come in and look at this space and put some funding to it in India. Any more questions? Yes, that's you in the green. Yeah.
Sorry, there's a lady there as
And
well.
you next, sorry.
So I think you mentioned that India is at quite an exciting time, and it is full of possibilities. I think I've been in the sector for about 8 years, and there's never been a time that there's been so many young people wanting to step up and tackle some of the biggest issues in the country. In the last 3 years, it's been incredible. Unfortunately, a lot of them, when they go out and raise money, they're told, come back to me in 5 years, come back to me when you hit 1 million, 5,000 is too small. And I'm sure Magic Bus and Going to School must have heard the same things when they started out. And we've talked about scale a couple of times earlier, and I think India needs 20 magic buses and 20 going to school in order to tackle it. What role can philanthropy play, not just to scale existing organizations, but also to spawn the next generation of change makers, or can I say the next 20 Matthew Spaceys that come out of India?
Thoughts?
So there are different models of philanthropy out there too, was what I was going to say, and some are really trying to provide that seed funding, and also some are looking at the next stage on. So I think, and you know, I'm thinking of the Amidja networks in this space, for example, but there are others where basically that is their business model, to support that. So that's one thing. I suppose another thing, and just speaking to your point a moment ago as well, joining hands can be a good thing too. And so whether that's formally in a consortium that's applying for something, or whether that's consolidation in some other way, might also be worth people thinking about.
As a foundation, we're always looking for the next magic bus or something like that that is innovative and different and radical in its approach, and not afraid to say, well, that didn't work, so we're going to try something different this time, and to actually challenge the space and look for those advocacy programs as well that can, you know, work with the government or the state legislature and get them to change and create a movement. So there is, I think, plenty of space still for the next generation of magic buses and others.
I mean, one of the things that we've funded is an awards program that helps to identify the smaller organisations who are working innovatively with girls to celebrate their achievements and to bring them to give them more exposure to donors, make their work more well known so that they can start to move to become a magic bus tomorrow.
You had a question.
Something to share and ask for views. Somebody said there are so many cancer charities, and why don't they work together? Now, you can imagine that many of us think that way in this country, because there's just not only the cancer charities, but there are many charities doing the same thing in this country. Whenever we've had the Charity Commissioner come and talk to us at the House of Commons, we have put this to him. But the Charity Commission has said that they have not been able to encourage any of the charities to work with anybody else. And you know perfectly well why. They feel it's their charity. They are the owners of it, and they want to stay the owners. I personally have been trying to get all the women's organizations connected with the Commonwealth together, and they're only about 9, and I'm having problems even in that. But they are coming together, because if we want to have some impact, us working together with the Commonwealth theme running through it, we'll achieve much more. Now, what I wanted to share with you is that I've been doing this sort of thing for about 25 years. I've been in development, and I've visited a lot of projects. I have seen very many different countries. And what has struck me most is that when a woman, not a child or a girl, but when a woman earns a little money, she totally changes. Her attitude to herself changes, first of all, which I think is fundamental. If you want the girl child to benefit, you also have to do something for the mother. You can't expect the girl child to change without the support of the mother. So I'm setting up a charity to try and bring that about in whatever way I can, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. I wanted to tell you about Bangladesh. I was there in February, and I had a very long chat with the representative of DPF at the High Commission. And she said that Bangladesh was doing better on all the major indicators, better than India. why? We always think of Bangladesh as mess, really. Somebody once told me, well, think of Bihar and then think of Bangladesh.
So you've given us three questions there. Can I just allow the panel?
I'm not expecting any answers. I just want to share. I want to share something with you because I think it's important. You may not, but I do. And you know why that is? Because of all the garment factories. Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder, there was an interesting point there about encouraging NGOs to work together. I've sometimes seen NGOs work very closely together, and I wonder if any of you have any tips on the work that you've done and how you've brought NGOs in India to work together. I know it's something that you have done, Lynn, so can you give us some sort of tips on how you can be effective in that space as a philanthropist?
This is DASRA work that we have partly funded. But taking organisations who are working in the same sector, say helping girls stay in second school or helping prevent child marriage, bringing those organisations together to spend time together, to both learn skills together but share problems, has led actually in one case where DASRA ran a programme for 35 NGO leaders. I think something like 60 different combination collaborations came out of that workshop. It wasn't a workshop, it was 4 workshops over a year. But 60 potential partnerships came out of that, and work is happening now to understand how those organisations will actually work closer together. So it is about providing opportunities for people to convene and talk about real problems.
We have time for about one more question. Does anyone else have a question? Yes.
Right, my name's Liz from Oxfam. It's just on the question, thank you. 2 questions ago regarding supporting young entrepreneurs in country, and I'd love to get the panel's view on how young philanthropists could support that particular area, and how young philanthropists look at giving in possibly a different way, and I just really welcome the panel's thoughts on that.
I like that question. Your thoughts on that?
Lynn, I do have some thoughts on it, actually. One of the great things about what's happening in India is that young philanthropists are now starting to become much more prominent. So particularly younger members of rich families who've been educated abroad are coming back to India with models of how philanthropy is working in other countries, and bringing that hunger to support a lot more than just temples, and in more strategic ways. So exposure, I think, to different models of philanthropy, training young philanthropists on how to, what is strategic philanthropy, what difference can it make, how can you be catalytic. One of the big turning points for me, and I'm not young, but I was on the program with younger philanthropists, was to go on the philanthropy workshop, which is a 3-week program that teaches you about strategic philanthropy and really forces the spotlight back on what are you doing and how can you do it a lot better. So I think encouraging people to go on programs like that, media articles that encourage young people to start thinking about their role as members of civil society, I think, are all helpful.
Unless, do you have anything you'd like to add to that, either of you? Sarah?
All I was going to say was that it's actually a really important question, because actually as well you see in the States and across Europe there's a generation turnover happening over the next decade. So the number of people that will be in this space that will be young and keen is going to be huge actually. So I think, as Lynn was saying, the kind of, if you like, capacity building and support for them to really engage meaningfully is going to be really important. It's it feels a bit like a pivot moment over the next decade.
Just to finish off by saying that we were talking about the role of media earlier, and I think if we want young philanthropists to engage in India, the media plays a role in that in order to get them to think about these issues. So if anybody's looking for a project, I think that would be a very worthwhile one.
I was in Mumbai earlier this year, and we were doing a partnership with DASRA, and with DASRA and through their work, I met a lot of very young philanthropists, Indian philanthropists, who are incredibly motivated to give in a different way, potentially, to the elder generation. And some of them were working in the technology space, or they were thinking about impact investing. So I think that the time is very exciting in India, both in terms of the opportunity that the change in that country presents for greater gender equality, but also because of the growth of wealth and the increasing imbalance in that wealth, that there is a generation of young people that are motivated to do something about it, and some of those young people have huge wealth. So I think it's an incredibly exciting time for India and the philanthropy space. And I'd just like to summarise before we go for lunch. I'm sure I can hear the lunch at the back. Philanthropy is so much about head and heart, and the three of you have demonstrated that so beautifully, because you're often motivated by your heart. And the philanthropists that I see, and I work with many that are most effective, are the ones that try and shut their heart down a bit and use their head. And I think you've given us some really fabulous examples of how you are strategic in a very, very complex, challenging space. And I'd just like to mention a few of them. I think SIF's sort of bringing a business approach, and in some cases, not necessarily SIF, but people bring a sort of private investment approach to the way that they invest in charities and in philanthropy. I think that's very valuable. I think learning from what's gone before, not trying to reinvent the wheel, you all know that. Risk, the philanthropist has the opportunity to take risk in a way that others don't. You have less accountability to people, apart from maybe yourself or people that you, someone disagrees. But in some cases, there's so much less, it may be to a partner or family foundation, but there's a real opportunity to take risks and test new things. I think the need in India and elsewhere for investment in people, human capital, advocacy, media, technology, capacity building is huge, and I really hope that people in this room will reflect on that in their own philanthropy. And then the thing that's come up for me in this session and the last that's so important is this working in partnership. And DASRA are a fabulous organisation that continually encourage us all to work in partnership. And it's not always easy, but when you do it and you do it well, you feel incredibly motivated. So I'd like to end by thanking the panel, you're three very inspirational women, and it's been a delight to sit here with you and hear from you, and I'd like to thank DASRA for bringing this room of people together. It's been great. Thank you.